Hi, I'm Liz.
And I'm Rhea.
Welcome to Karma's My Bitch, a podcast about love,
Sex,
connection,
abundance,
joy,
purpose,
peace,
and how life isn't simply the stories we tell ourselves.
In the previous episode, we talked about the spectrum, right? The emotional spectrum, and how dealing with your karma and your karmic undoing process allows you to understand that emotional spectrum, and all the feelings that you thought you felt were actually probably smaller in separation than it really is, right? So what you're looking at is a much broader emotional spectrum. And when you learn to operate within that broad emotional spectrum, you have a different context for those feelings. You're able to heal a lot of the ones, all the icky ones, as you said, and you gain a new perspective.
Okay.
Now, but having gone through all of that,
it's horrific.
It's horrific, but some might think, well, I understand happiness well because of everything I went through.
Yes.
Right? That being on one end of that spectrum and all the depths of that horrific experience allows me to at least appreciate and recognize when I am happy.
Yes.
Yeah. And all that brings, right?
Yeah. But so, we're just forgetting the fact that actually as we heal this stuff, we tend to forget it ever happened.
Yeah,
the feelings of it. Okay.
Exactly. But we can also look at somebody who has had minor trauma, if anything, no karma, and you think, well, can you actually be happy? Right? If they can't really understand and connect to deep feelings that come from having gone through something so difficult, then they're not capable of understanding the other side. They can never understand me. We're not, we wouldn't fit.
People tend to bond over their trauma. So you're, like to connect to someone else, you're like, oh yeah, that bad thing happened to me too. Oh yeah, that bad thing happened to me too. I know they were so raw and vulnerable because they told me all the bad things that happened to them.
So then I felt like I could share all the bad and horrible things that happened to me. So even if they weren't
now we're so close.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even if they weren't the same things, the fact that we went through something so horrific and bad means that we really just get those feelings.
Yeah, I've had bad feelings. Like I haven't always had the happiest of days, especially like in like kind of deep in like my undoing or whatever. But it's not like something so horrific happened to me.
Well, exactly, right? Because a lot of our feelings, whether we acknowledge it or not, are also very relative. They're not just relative to us, and they're not just situational, but sometimes we also judge them and determine their good and badness, right? If you, for lack of a, based on what other people have experienced.
Yeah.
Right. So,
and I know so many people saying like, that's what gratitude teaches us, right? Okay. So I had a shit day today, but it's worse because, people are dying. Or when we were kids, they were like, well, I have to eat all my vegetables because there are children in Africa that are starving.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there's always those memes now when you like got the broccoli, it's like, do it for Africa. Like it was like, that was always how it was for us.
The image of starving people does not make me laugh, but yes, it makes me laugh just remembering that stuff.
You know what I mean? Like we always had that kind of stuff.
I mean,
so
poor
was
children.
Always there's good and bad, and there's always bad and good, and you're not allowed to feel sad. And I mean, even when I have disagreements with the people around me, and they're like, "Well, you just don't know what it's like to be me," and I'm like, "No, I don't." That I feel bad for being upset because their upset is relatively worse than my upset, but my upset feels still really upset.
Yeah, no.
You know what I mean?
The thing is, Rhea, what you're actually describing is complete emotional manipulation, which is one of the reasons why we're so emotionally stupid. Yeah. And I don't mean that in terms of, well, then there's emotionally stupid and emotionally intelligent. I don't buy into any of that. But the point is that we cannot connect to our own feelings and understand that emotional scale when we've always been emotionally manipulated to the point where we equate, somehow our not eating something somehow affects somebody in another continent.
Yes, no, exactly,
right?
Exactly. But then, so those people who haven't had any trauma, how can they be? Do they define their happiness separately too? You know what I'm trying to ask you and failing miserably.
I don't think you're failing at all, and I think it's fine. I think it's really important to understand that, well, we're all capable of happiness, right? Is effectively why we're here again, and the purpose of the season. But when somebody has not had any karma or trauma to work from, their capacity for happiness is actually born from their capacity to give. So, and I'll explain this a bit further. It's not like the more I give, the happier I will be, because obviously that's not, you can't scale happiness. But it's more that how can they connect to their inherent gifts, and how, by incorporating those gifts, like how can they channel it into their purpose in such a way that it becomes fundamental to their life path and fate. Does that make sense? So if you take episode 1 and being the truest, fullest expression of who you are, right? All that self-expression coming in. And can you give it over to the collective in a way where you're not sacrificing yourself, but you are putting yourself out there in such a way that is also happiness. It's not the act of living your purpose, but it's being all that you really can be in that way.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Kind of. Like in my head, I'm thinking, all right, for those who kind of went through their karma and who did all that stuff, the effort and the trauma and the healing that follows it, it's being born in separation, becoming separate to oneself, and then finding the way back. That's where the pain is, right? Because you're not making new pain. You're just seeing what pain already exists.
Yeah.
And getting through it.
Yeah.
So if nothing's happened to you and you just lived a really cushy life, you can get to happiness by really expressing yourself and B, sharing that expression.
Exactly. And
in all the ways in which you do it.
And understanding that my being happy just means another happy person in the world, which shifts things, right?
It does. It really does.
It really does. And
because
so
if you think about it, the happy person speaking to the happy person, if you're happy and you're interacting with someone else, then they're more happy for being with you. Then it's like a multiplier effect.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And so what we're seeing, the younger generations are just kind of showing us that being is more important than doing. And so I'm going to share this anecdote that we'll see if it goes in or not, but I think it's worth sharing because I think it kind of speaks to the disconnect, not a disconnection within, but just this kind of generational disconnect, if you will. So, I'm part of Gen X and, so I grew up in the generation of like work hard, go to a good school, that good school and that degree is going to like afford you a nice career, et cetera, right? You kind of get tracked that way. And I went to a parent event last night for my daughter's school. And it's just funny how often when you encounter other parents, the disconnect they experience with their kids. It's like, yes, there are still some families and some parents and kids who are still kind of driven for the Ivies and, certain types of schools because they still believe in that kind of high achieving mindset. And it's not about it's not about losing the high achieving mindset, but it's allowing that to broaden.
Okay.
Where I can still be achieving in terms of my own personal goals, not outward goals, because a lot of that was just sort of separation mindset.
Yes.
Right? Where I'm just going to keep climbing the ladder and this tent pole so I'm not at the bottom and maybe I'll just kind of like be financially comfortable. And of course, as a parent, you want your child to feel secure. You want them to not suffer, end up on the streets or whatever happens, like whatever you value. But effectively, what I'm kind of seeing are a lot of parents who are just trying to grasp and grapple with the idea that like, wow, our children really are approaching things differently. Their goal might be as simple as, you know what? I know what's going to make me happy, or I know what's going to contribute to my happiness and my joy. And that means going to a school in this place or in this state. Yeah. Because maybe being in winter and maybe not being able to access certain things are really going to bring me down.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have to suffer. I don't want to think that I can't have a good life if I don't go to one of the top 10 schools.
I don't want to have to suffer. Mm-hmm. Because that is, for me, the sentence that encapsulates this.
Yeah.
Right? I know that we've kind of spoken about what happiness is not before what it is.
Yeah.
But I don't want to have to suffer is if you have two choices, one of them involves suffering in some way and one of them doesn't. Yeah. But one of them is frowned upon and one of them isn't. like naturally the older generations are going to choose the one that is more like not frowned upon, right?
Right.
Because we're sold that happiness comes later.
Yeah. Delayed gratification is the mantra of my generation.
Yeah, you know, you've got to work hard, you've got to fit into these things, you know, you've got to buy the right things, have the right things, and that's what will eventually get you to happiness maybe in your 60s or 70s. God forbid you pass before then, you miss out on all of that.
Yes.
Right?
God forbid.
But actually, I don't want to have to suffer now. What you're doing is you're bringing that future and you're bringing it into your present. Mm-hmm. Fear tells us if we do it this way, we'll fall on our asses. Yeah. But actually, maybe we won't.
Maybe we won't.
Maybe actually doing these things now, whatever it is actually the way in which we ensure more happiness rather than we get used to suffering. And then that's all we end up creating because we're so used to it.
But the whole thing about delayed gratification is it kind of goes back to that previous episode about future sustainability. Every time we're putting our energy into a future, every time we're pouring everything into the idea of tomorrow, we're actually trying to shape something that we don't even allow to present. And so we're then expecting it to look a certain way. And when it doesn't, we're often shocked, which is often why we end up in crises later in life.
And we have more separation.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not good enough. I wasn't even good enough to follow the rules and then get what I wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
But actually, like, and this is the thing is that, you know, we discuss in the magic series, in the magic episodes a lot about how wanting more is really important.
Yeah.
And saying yes is really important. And saying no is really important when we're out of our karma. How when we're in our karma, saying yes is more important than no. But once we get out of it, sometimes saying no is the key to kind of moving along our fate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And at the time when you said that, I really didn't understand it because I was like, oh, isn't that what the rules tell us to do? Isn't that what tests tell us to do? Should I be going against myself? Now I understand it very differently. It's simply, I choose not to suffer. So anything that's going to present itself to me where I know for whatever reason it's not what I want, me saying no isn't me passing some test because it might be totally against conventional wisdom to say no. But for me, I don't want to suffer anymore. I want to travel or maybe live somewhere sunny. I want to have all those amazing things that I've been shelving because I've been waiting for the right time. I just want to start now because otherwise we'll always wait. And I remember it kind of occurred to me that keeping myself in the energy of waiting, right? I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. I'm not
It won't
ready
happen
yet.
yet. It can't happen yet.
It can't happen yet. Made sure that I was always perpetually in the before rather than in the present.
Yeah.
And actually, sometimes it's about stopping and being like, wait a second. I don't need to wait to deserve this. I don't need to work harder so I'm ready for this. I don't need to learn something new so I experience this. Happiness now.
Yes. So it's interesting, though, because there are a lot of people who are like, well, then if it's not happening now, then therefore I'm not doing something.
Yes, I've been there, done that.
Yes.
Many T-shirts.
But what we're saying, that's not the same thing. It's not because you have to learn something more or, you know, there are a variety of reasons for that. And that's not what this episode is about. You can make choices that where in your present, you know that it's the right one. And for people who haven't had their karmic undoing process because they never needed it, it's a lot easier for them to direct their hearts.
Basically, if you haven't had your karmic undoing process, you're basically just at the place where we've all caught up to.
Yes, exactly.
It's as simple as that,
Yeah.
right?
And you don't
And then so
have,
the younger you are...
And you don't have insecurities or doubts
Yeah,
that had been
that
wired
would be
in
nice.
because of your karmic, you know, your karmic experience. So it's a lot easier to not question it. But what happens with these young ones is because their parents are constantly questioning because they don't understand it, it can force them to question.
Once we kind of realize our happiness and we know what it feels like and we know that we can make decisions from that space, the moments that preceded it aren't as important as it just experiencing it from then on out.
Yeah.
And it becomes so precious that we won't settle for anything less than that. And even the doubts that, you know, and this is the bit I'm going to say, which I don't know if you would disagree with me on, but for me, when I got to a place where I was kind of happy, but I had those doubts and those insecurities, those doubts were because it was so important to me. I didn't want to lose it. And that not wanting to lose it bit, that's the separation bit of, well, you've reached the pinnacle, so now it's only downhill from here. When actually it's the opposite. If you think about it, we're constantly learning more, getting better, having better experiences, everything is improving. So if you start from that kind of happiest place, you've only got more happiness to go, and happiness that probably other people have never experienced before because they never let themselves start living their happiness in the first place.
Mm-hmm. You know, some might regard this younger generation as those who just want things easy, right? A willingness to take the path of least resistance because they don't want to try, they don't want to work hard. Yeah. But it's because we're constantly having to reframe what it means to work hard. And they're not afraid to work. They're not afraid to put in the effort. But again, it comes down to, but I don't feel like I have to suffer for my life. And I'm comfortable, and I know I can actually live a life of abundance that doesn't mean enslaving myself to the system. And we are going to struggle with this more and more, the more of these young ones come through, which is why this has to be its own episode.
Well, you know what? Ultimately, the way I see it is, and I definitely feel like sometimes I've been that young one where people are like, you know, I remember my mum once saying to me, but there's a limit on fun. And I was like, is there? Why is there a limit on fun? Why can't I just keep doing what makes me happy? Or like, you know, people think that I don't work very hard when actually we work so fucking hard, or all the other things, right? But ultimately, if we're going to criticize these younger generations for wanting things easier, my question to you is, why wouldn't they? Don't you? Why do we want to spread our suffering to generation after generation? Why do we want them to learn the hard way if there's an easy way? Surely what we want for our children are to be happier and have better lives than we did. So why do we keep asking them to live the shit that we did? Just why? So we know that it was worth it? Because it wasn't. All that shit did was split us even further. So when someone says, oh, they want it easy, or they're such snowflakes, or, you know, they don't want to work and blah, blah, are they fine? Are they happy? Is everything okay for them for now and the foreseeable? We don't need to worry about what's going to come down the road, because no one saw half the things that are currently happening down the road, and they all affected our lives. So actually having that strong center where you do know yourself, where you do have that kind of inner happiness and you're able to choose, means that when the shit gets hard outside of you, you're still able to maintain that. Without that foundation, you're going to get swept up in the wind and then be even more unhappy. So surely it's something we should be heralding rather than trying to squash. Otherwise, we're not changing the world for the better. We're just keeping it as it is. And keeping it as we currently live it, would just ensure that it imploded.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. For more information, articles, and inspiration, find us at karmasmybitch.com and at karmasmybitch.insta.
And if you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review.